Hey, Intro to Accounting, Mr. Roberts here, and today we're going to go through checking accounts. So, everything we've learned in this class kind of builds on top of each other. And now we get to chapter 5, and it takes a little bit of a detour. And we start talking about cash controls, and really how we write checks is going to be this first unit. So there's some vocab in here that might be new, and some things that you're just going to have to really take a step back and watch it and go through the book a couple times, making sure that you understand everything here, and asking any questions that you might have. So let's jump right in. Lesson 5.1, we have 3 learning objectives. The first one is going to be record a deposit on a check stub. Next one is going to be endorse checks using blank, special, and restrictive endorsements. And then the last thing is going to be prepare a check stub and a check. And that's going to be the big hands-on activity that we do for this chapter. So you can see here that I've highlighted a lot of different things because I think that almost every single page in this chapter is important. Okay, so I'd kind of go through every single one, especially for 5.1. It says, in accounting, money is usually referred to as cash. Most businesses make major cash payments by check. That's a really big first line that's there. Whenever we say paid cash for supplies, what that really means is we're going to our check register and we're writing out a check for supplies. Very rarely are you going to be using actual cold hard cash. It says on the next line, some small cash payments for postage, or maybe some supplies may be used if we have a fund that we'll look in chapter 5, and it's called a petty cash fund. And that's just some cash that we might have on hand to, buy something really small like stamps or some pencils or staples. But when it comes to almost everything else, we're going to use a check, okay? And in accounting, we'll say we paid cash, but what it really means is most of the time we wrote a check. It might say we received cash for providing services. That's what it might say for Mr. Delgado. What it really means is we received a check. So that's going to be something important. And why do we receive checks instead of exchanging cash? Well, cash is really, really hard to track. If you've been a cashier or worked anywhere else before, you probably know that it's easy to lose cash as well. All right, so we want to limit that. We want to have cash control, and a lot of times the way that we do that is by using checks. So cash can be transferred from one person to the next with literally no questions about ownership. If I took $20 from your pocket today and I walked around with it and I went to pay for something later on in the day, no one would say, is that $20 yours, right? Because whoever has it is the person that owns that money. So we can lose a lot of cash for not really protecting it. It says, as a safety measure, Delgado Web Services keeps most of its cash in the bank. Yeah, if you're a business, you're going to do that. The more money that you have laying around, probably the worse, okay? The worse that it's going to be. So you don't really want to do something like that. Because all cash receipts are placed in a bank, Delgado Web Services has written evidence to support its accounting records. So it says Delgado Web Services can compare its records of checks written with the bank's records of checks paid, right? So what we're going to be doing here is using the bank. Anytime that we write checks or receive checks, the bank's going to have a record of that. But it's not like the bank just automatically has a record. We have to do our part as well. And that's what doing this unit, that's what kind of going through this unit is going to help us with. They do kind of jump into this ethics in action, kind of goes into some of the things that we're talking about, because when it comes to cash, a lot of times that's where our ethics might come into question, because it's really easy to see a pile of cash and go, well, no one's really gonna care if it disappears, right? Or I'm not gonna get caught. And they kind of talk here and say there's a business code of conduct, and they walk through one. It says our values and standards have always formed the basis of our success. They inspire trust and confidence on the part of the medical community, government officials, regulatory agencies, financial markets, our customers and patients, and all whom are essential to our success. And this is for this Merck & Company Pharmaceuticals. What I would say is that if you're ever running a business, just because you write down a really fancy code of conduct doesn't mean it actually takes place. You have to build a culture around this code of conduct. that you have. So this is just a little bit of a, hey, you can't just write it down. You got to follow through on those practices. I'm sure maybe some of you have worked for a company and they have a motto or they have a code of conduct and you read it over once, you never see it again. It's not enough to just write it down. So the first thing that we're going to do when it comes to checks is deposit cash. Think of if we had a bunch of sales for the day and we have a register, and we don't want to keep that cash on hand for a very long time. We want to deposit that cash because cash just happens to disappear. So here we have a deposit slip, okay? It says when a checking account, or if you look a little bit further down here, it says a bank form which lists the checks, currency, and coins and account holders adding to the bank account is called a deposit slip. So maybe you've used this. I just kind of put the question on there. Have you used this deposit slip before? Each bank is going to have a slightly different deposit slip, but for the most part, they're going to look relatively close to the same and have the same information that's going to be on there, okay? So if you ever went to the bank and you got a $10 check from grandma for your birthday and then maybe some change and a couple dollars, you would fill out a deposit slip. And this is a really great record to show how much money you have actually put into your account. And when we fill out a deposit slip, we must have something to actually put our money into. And that's going to be considered a checking account. It says here a bank account from which payments can be ordered by a depositor is called a checking account. And the depositor is the person that owns it, right? It is the person that owns that checking account. So if you have a checking account, technically you're the depositor on that account. You're the one that puts money in there. And why would we want a checking account? Well, a checking account is a really great tool for us because it allows us to write checks, okay? We must have a checking account to actually write checks. So if you're a business, you're going to have a business checking account. And, maybe you've seen checks before. I'm just going to pull something up real quick here. Let me just add this to our screen. So if you look here, this is something, this is what a deposit ticket might look like for a specific bank, right? They all look a little bit different. But here's a deposit ticket. It shows your name, the date, and then any cash that you bring in, any checks, what's the subtotal. So if you had cash and checks, it's just adding them up. And then less cash because maybe you're getting some cash back or something else, right? And then you have your total. And then next to it is going to be a check. And a check is one of those things that, people say they're going away, but businesses use them all the time. If you ever have to pay rent, it's usually going to be through a check. So it's good to kind of know a little bit about them. And it's a great control over our cash. So if you look down here, you can see most of the things that would go on a check, right? Your name, the check number, the date, who it's being written out to, the dollar amount, and then the dollar amount actually written out. The 4 is our memo line. And then we have our name on the bottom right that we would sign. So just wanted to kind of bring that up, show it to you real quick, because, checks and deposits might look a little bit different, but they'll all have the same information on it. Deposit slip is when we're putting money in. When we write a check, we are actually telling the bank, hey, I want you to take money out of my account and pay this other person. Okay, so grandma sends you a $10 check for your birthday. Grandma's telling the bank when she writes out that check, I want you to give this money to little Tommy here for his birthday. This is permission to take it out of my account. And if you look here, it says checks are listed on a deposit slip according to the bank routing number on each. So the bank routing number is an identification number of that actual bank. And you can see here that on our deposit list, or our deposit sheet, we're going to put in the check here, the check's routing number. And this means that we have $2,000 that's actually going to be deposited into our checking account. So when we make that deposit, the bank is going to give us a receipt, okay? And it's going to be for our records, right? So then we can tell, let's say we go back home and that money's not in the bank. Well, we have that receipt that shows that that money should have been placed there. If you see up here, it says January 2nd. So this is some information that you'd have. It'd be like January 2nd is the date that this deposit was made. It was $2,000, and this is the name of the teller. Or the initials of the teller. It can be different from bank to bank. So that's our deposit slip. And, next we're going to kind of look at a deposit and how it's recorded on a check stub. So we pulled up that little sheet that we had here. Where is it? I must have closed it out. But here, I'll just pull up this one real quick. Actually, no, never mind. We'll just ignore that. So we looked at what a check would look like, and what we have here is a check stub. So you see this perforated little line here where it shows that it's, like you could almost tear it off. This is going to be connected to your check, okay? And we'll see what that looks like in just a second. But you can see here it says number 1 because this would be connected to check number 1. And after what we're going to do is we're going to record our deposit that we just had on this check stub. So the balance is going to be brought forward every single time that we have a new check. And this is going to be a running total of what we have in our checking account. And we want this total to match our actual bank account, right? So here you can see that this is the first check, and they're all going to be listed. So we have check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you use them in order. But you can see that we're starting our business here, or starting this checking account, and the amount deposited is $2,000. Okay, $2,000 here. And the subtotal is $2,000. The balance brought forward is 0 because we've had no other money in that account yet. All right, so we'll get into that. It helps when you do a couple, so we'll make sure that we get in there and do a couple on your work together problem. So we have these deposit slips. We're recording it. We get a receipt, and then we record that deposit on our check stub for our records. Then we kind of transition to learning objective number 2, and this, I would say, is a little bit more confusing, and you just kind of got to remember the terms here. But we're looking at endorsements, and endorsements is pretty much going to be, you see here, a signature or stamp on the back of a check. Transferring ownership is called an endorsement, okay? And when we have a check, it can be transferred from one person to the next, right? So if your grandma is giving you $10 for your birthday, she is transferring that money over from her to you now. Now you own that check. So the first name of the owner is stated on the check following the words, pay it to the order of, okay? So whoever it's written out to, if it was written out to little Timmy and it says, Timmy Jones, and it says pay to the order of Timmy Jones, that means that you now have ownership of that check. And what you could do is you could transfer that ownership again. And the way that we do that is with endorsements. So you can see here it says an endorsement should be signed exactly as the person's name appears on the front of the check. So if we have a check made payable to Michael Delgado, and it's endorsed on the back as Michael Delgado, what it kind of comes down to is, like, if it says that this check is payable to Michael Delgado, then on the back when we endorse it, it should say Michael Delgado, okay? If the check was written out to Timmy Jones and Michael Delgado signed it on the back, something's wrong, okay? Unless Timmy Jones transfers that ownership, which we're going to talk about in just a second. So there's 3 types of endorsements that are most commonly used, how to transfer ownership. and come back to this page, okay, when we start working on the work together until you get used to it. So there's 3 different types. The first one is going to be a blank endorsement. So an endorsement consisting only of the signature of the endorser's signature is called a blank endorsement. A blank endorsement indicates that the subsequent owner is whoever has the check. So if a check with a blank endorsement is lost or stolen, the check can be cashed by anyone who has possession of it. Ownership may be transferred without further endorsement. A blank endorsement should use only when a person is at the bank ready to cash or deposit a check. So, when it says blank, it's not actually blank, right? It's signed by that individual. Now, they say here, if Michael Delgado signed this and then we lost it, anybody can technically cash it. Anybody that works at a bank knows that there's security measures in place. That's usually not going to happen, okay? Especially if it's a large dollar amount. They do say make sure that you sign it when you're there because technically somebody could cash it. It's kind of why this unit, sometimes I don't like it as much because, it's saying these things, but in real life, the bank is probably going to have some security measures in place. So that's a blank endorsement. It's not actually blank. The person that owns the check is gonna sign it, and then they can cash this. Okay, they could either cash it, take it out as cash, or they can deposit in their account. They can pretty much do whatever they want with it. Next, there was a special endorsement. So this is going to indicate a new owner of that check. Maybe we want to give this check over to somebody else. So special endorsements are sometimes called endorsements in full. So special endorsements include the words "pay to the order of" and the name of the new check owner. So only the person or business named in a special endorsement can cash, deposit, or further transfer that ownership of the check. The original owner of the check also signs his or her name under the name of the new owner of the check. So let's say that this was originally paid to Michael Delgado. And Michael Delgado says, okay, I'm going to actually transfer this check over to Helen Goldsmith. So on the back of the check, that's where this endorse here is. You would write "pay to the order of" and then Helen Goldsmith, okay? And then underneath that, you would write your name as the original owner of the check that is then giving ownership over to Helen Goldsmith. A little bit complicated, but that's a special endorsement transferring that ownership. And then the last one is called a restrictive endorsement. And this is, once again, this could transfer ownership over of the check, but it's restricting that check's ownership. So it says depositing a check in a bank account is a common use of a restrictive endorsement. A restrictive endorsement limits use of checks to whatever purpose is stated on the endorsement. Many businesses have a stamp prepared with a restrictive endorsement. When a check is received, it's immediately stamped with that endorsement. This prevents unauthorized persons from cashing the check if it's lost or stolen. So think about this for a second. Mr. Delgado gets a check from a business owner, and he might be concerned as a business owner that this check might get lost or something else. So immediately when he receives it, he has a rubber stamp, and boom, he stamps it, and it says "for deposit only to the accounts of Delgado Web Services," which is pretty much saying this is the only place that it can go. So now Mr. Delgado feels pretty confident that if he loses this check, nobody can take it and just go cash it or put it anywhere else. Here it also says "for deposit only," which means it can only go into Delgado Web Services bank account. It cannot be cashed or anything else actually be done with that check. So those are our 3 types, okay? We have blank, special, and restrictive. And you're going to have to remember those for the test and for a couple of the problems that we're about to come up against. And now, this unit's pretty big, okay? 5.1 has a lot of stuff in it. Now we're going to actually complete a check stub and a check. So, take careful attention to detail here when it comes to the steps. What are we doing first? We are doing the deposit slip first on the left-hand side, okay? The deposit slip first on the left-hand side before we do anything else, okay? Very, very important to know. So let's jump in here. It says Delgado Web Services uses printed checks with check stubs attached. Okay, here's our check stub, which is where we're going to put the information for our deposit slips. And you might be thinking, like, these seem like two different things. And they are two different things. They're just recorded on the same slip. You could almost think of this right here, like this bottom part, as like just a running total of your checking account. Okay, the top is actually going to be a duplicate pretty much of the check that you're writing. So it's just all going in one little area. It says consecutive numbers are on checks, providing an easy way of identifying each check. The numbers help keep track of all checks to ensure none are lost or replaced. So you can see here that it says number 1 up on the top right and number 1 up on the top left. This is showing that this is check number 1. Now, why is that important? Well, we use them in order. So if we have a record for check number 1, check number 2, and check number 4, where the heck did check number 3 go? Okay, so now we have a problem, now we have an issue, and we have to figure out who we wrote out check number 3 to, and then we can go out there and solve that problem, whatever it may be. So when we're looking at this, you can see that the numbers are going to match, and they will be in order. You're not going to go from check 1 to check 2 to check number 67. They will be in order. And a check stub is a business record. Okay, this is a business record. It's going to be written in black pen, black or blue ink, and it's showing any kind of cash payment transaction. It's subjective evidence, just like our source documents would be. Okay, same thing. So after the check stub is completed, the check is written. So we are going to write out our check stub. And there's all these steps here. It's going to be hard to go back and forth. So let me just go through the top here. Let's see if I can pop this up. If it gets any bigger. All right. So the first thing that we're doing is we are going to write the amount of the check that we are currently writing. So this check is $165, right? So in section 1 is showing check number 1 is $165. In the spot number 2, we're going to put in the date of the actual check. So the date of this check is January 2nd. We can see it right here. Now, sometimes we have this term down here, and I can't see it right now, but here, I'll pull it up. It's called a check with a future date is called a post-dated check. This is a term you're going to want to know, okay? So the bank's not going to actually accept this check until the date has come. Think about if you were paying your rent and you wanted to write February 1st here. Well, you don't give that check to your landlord on February 1st. You probably give it to him on, January 25th, making sure that you get your rent in on time. So just to ensure that he doesn't cash that on January 25th, you post-date it, and the bank won't accept it till that date. So just a little term to kind of go over. Number 3 is, who is it going to? Well, this check is going to go to Eastside Supplies. And number 4 is kind of our memo line. So it says, what is this check for? Well, it's for supplies. That way we have a really nice record and we know why we're spending this money. Now here, this information is already going to be listed out, okay, because this is what we filled out when we had our deposit slip. So you can see that there was a balance brought forward. We have the amount deposited here. 1, 2, that must, well, our date will look a little different. Maybe that's January 2nd. And the amount that was deposited was $2,000. So it shows our subtotal here, which is $2,000. We would, if we had checks or anything, it's going to be written here, like additional deposit checks. But then we have the subtotal, okay? So this is just pretty much what's in the bank account before you write this check. Now, since you're writing this check, what we put on number 5 here, the amount of this check. Well, it's $2,000, right? Or excuse me, it's $165. We're buying supplies for $165. So the amount on the check is $165. And now what they want us to do is calculate out that new balance. So we have $2,000 in our checking account, and we're writing a check for $165. How would we find that balance? Well, we subtract the check from the amount that we have in that checking account. So 2,000 minus 165 gives us a new balance of 1,835. That is the last step on the check stub. Now, taking a break from these steps, this balance carried forward, when we get to check number 2, this balance carried forward will actually go right here, okay, when we get into check number 2. Just a quick little note, because then when we get into check number 2, we'll have the new balance of the bank account. So what do we do for step number 7? And this is just writing out a check. A lot of people don't know how to do this, so it's good that we're going over it. But first thing we do is we write down the date, okay? January 2nd is the date that check is going to be written. For number 8, we're going to write East Side Supplies. So we write out who the check is going to. Now, based on the business entity concept, what that means is the person that owns the business and the business are two different entities, okay? So, you know, when your grandma writes you a check and it's Timothy Jones, that's real easy. But Michael, we couldn't write out a check to Michael Delgado, right? We're probably going to have to write it out to Delgado Web Services because we're paying the business, not the individual. Just remember that, okay? So here for Eastside Supplies, we need to write down the actual name of the company because they're going to have a separate company bank account, right? Because they need to be separate. So just a little note there. Number 9, we write out the dollar amount in a numerical value. What I would say is write it as far over to the left as you can because you don't want anybody adding any numbers in there. I actually would write a line after those 2 zeros to just make sure that no one can modify anything. Then for number 10, we're writing out the dollar amount, but we're writing it out in words. And this is the first place that the bank goes to when they look for accuracy. They're going to look at the actual written out amount. And here you can see that we write out 165 and no /100, meaning no cents. And then after that, we're going to draw a line straight across, okay? Straight across so nobody can modify this. Once again, start writing as far over to the left as you can. And this way, nobody should be able to modify this check. Number 11 is the memo line. Here we're writing what this is for. And number 12, we're actually signing our check. Now, if you flip this check over, it would say endorse here on the back, and that's where all of our endorsements are actually going to go. So, come back here, revisit this page because there's a lot to it, okay? There's a lot to it. Next, we are going to record a voided check, all right? So once again, we covered a lot of things in this unit. Recording a voided check. So what is a voided check? Well, a voided check is pretty much saying, it's a big X. It's saying you do not cash this check. There is a mistake on it. We are voiding it. It is no longer good. So you might do that if the bank refuses it because it's altered. If there's any kind of error, they could say, we're not accepting it. And because those checks beforehand, when we were talking about, are pre-numbered, if we can't use check number 2 because there was an error on it, we need to void that check out. And how do you do that? Well, you just write void across the entire check, right? I've had to void out a check before, and I just void as big as I can across the entire thing so it can't actually be cashed. And when we record this, all we're going to do is put in the date, write the word void, and then we write the check number here, hit check mark for post reference because we're not going to record this anywhere, right? This is our general journal. Will we have a ledger account, which you just did in the previous chapter for this? No, we won't, okay? And you just write check marks, you just write dashes all the way across debit and credit. So this is you're only making one entry here, and it's just void, okay? This isn't There's not a double entry here where you write anything on 2 lines. It's just 1 line. And you're going to write void. All right. A lot of stuff in 5.1, okay? Make sure that you're referring back to the book, and we'll jump into the work together. Okay, so here we are on 5.1 work together. Let's jump in. You can see the first thing that we're going to do is write in some endorsements, right? So for each of these situations, prepare the appropriate endorsement. Enter student's signature in cells where you would enter the endorser's signature. Okay, so you're not going to actually put your own name in there, right? It's just going to be student signature. So let's go in here and let's open up our book. Once again, I want you guys to use your book for this stuff because I think it'll help. So let's go into 5, and then we can just go right into endorsements. I'm just going to give us some hints, right? So let me move. I'll move into the middle here. And the first one is going to be in blank endorsement. Well, what do? We're just going to put our student signature sign right here because that's what a blank endorsement is. Next is write a special endorsement to transfer a check to Clara Kwan. Okay, well, if I do that, it's a special endorsement, I'm transferring that over. I'm going to put pay to the order of, and then I will put Clara Kwan, right? Because that's the name. Like here we're transferring it over to Helen Goldsmith. And then after that, I put student signature, okay? Next, it says write a restrictive endorsement. Let's go down to restrictive. To deposit a check in the account of Grantsburg Accounting. Well, how do I do a restrictive endorsement for just depositing a check? Let's just copy this. For deposit only to the account of, and then now we have Grantsburg Accounting, and let's put in student signature. All right, let's see what we got here. Okay, looks all good, right? So there we are. Let's move on to check, or step number 2, which it looks like we're writing out a check. So why don't I move back into my table of contents here, and I'll go back to 5, and going into completing a check stub. Oops. Let me go back in just real quick. All right, there we go. So, you know, you can follow down here, or you can follow what's going on up top. I'm just going to move my head again a little bit. And I wonder, can I make this bigger? There we go. That's what I want. Okay. So let's look at our check. It says record the balance brought forward on check stub number 151, $2,145.88. Okay. Record a deposit of $316 made on June 30th of the current year on check stub number 151. Prepare check number 151 to A1 Computers for repairs, $148. Use June 30th as the date. Enter student signatures in cells where you would sign the check. All right, so we got a lot of stuff going on here. I think the first thing we'd want to do, even because this is already calculated over here, right? Like we don't have any steps, but we need to bring this balance forward. You can see it's check sub number 151. Do you think we have some money in this account? Well, hopefully, right? Because we're on check number 151. We've made a lot of transactions. So balance brought forward here is $2,145.88. Okay. So that's the first thing that we're going to do. And it also wants to record a deposit of $316 that was made on June 30th. So we're just putting in the information from the previous deposit that we had. So you remember when we had the deposit slip, we get a receipt of that, and then we're going to record it on here. So this was deposited on 6/30th, okay, June 30th, and it was $316. So the next thing we have to do is we have to put in our subtotal. Now the subtotal is going to be the balance that's brought forward plus the $316 that we had. So I'm going to pull up a calculator here. I'm not going to put it on the screen, but let's just add it up. 2,145.88 plus 316 is 2,461.88. No, it can't be that. I must have put it in wrong because that doesn't make sense. 2,145.88 plus 316. I think I added a zero there. There we go. Okay. 2,461.88. I was going to say. All right. 2,461.88. Okay. So when we look here, there's no other deposits that we have, right? There's no other deposits, so we can leave this blank. We actually bring this amount down, so 2,461.88, okay? And that's kind of like our pre-work before we even write out the check, right? So we kind of got that part done. Now we can follow the steps that are up here, okay, on the right-hand side. So we've kind of gotten to that place now where we can go ahead and record this check. So prepare check number 151 to A1 Computer for repairs, and it's $148. So that's the first thing that I'm going to put in here. It's $148. What's the date? Well, it's June 30th. So I'm going to put June with a period and then 30, just like we would in our journal. Who's it going to be to? Well, it's to A1 Computers. And then step number 4 here is, what is it for? Well, it's for repairs. So I wonder if I put in like computer. Okay, yeah, I was going to put in computer repairs and it won't let me. So you can see it's kind of got to be specific for what it is, but it'll turn red if it's not correct. So that's steps 1 through 4. Let's go to step number 5. What's the amount that's actually on this check? Well, it's 148, right? Because we're recording the amount that we're going to write out this check for. It's $148. So what's the balance that's going to be carried forward? We can calculate this out right now. So 2,461.88, and I got a calculator here, right? And we're going to subtract 148. It's going to be 2,313.88. Okay, so do you see where we got that from? We had the subtotal minus the amount of this check. Now, why would it be minus and not plus? Because we as a company are writing a check to somebody else, right? Like, here's our deposit. Here's where we actually received money, that $316. But the check that we're about to write, we're writing it to somebody else. We're giving the bank permission to take that money out. So here is where we're recording that. And on this side, we're pretty much just transferring that information over. Now we're actually writing out the check. So let's put in the check date, right? So our check date was the 30th. Okay, so June 30th. Pay to the order of. Now this is the company that we're paying it to, so that's A1 Computers. And the dollar amount was $148.00. Now this part can be a little bit tricky, right? Because now we have to write it in words. So we're going to put 140, and you can see here, like, it's turning red, okay? So what we're going to need to do is you're actually going to put a dash, and then you can write the 8, okay? It's just hard to kind of get used to, but that's how you do it. And then I'm going to put no \100 because it's no change out of 100. And then if you're actually writing this check, you'd write that line going straight across so nobody could modify it. And then from here, what is this for? Well, this is for repairs. And we would write in our signature. Okay, so that would be the last thing that we would do. Alrighty. Grade step 2. And that is everything. So that's a lot, right? it's a lot. So let's move on to the next step. We have check number 152. We're doing the same thing, okay? Bring the balance forward for check number 152. So if you remember this is the amount that we had at the very end. Prepare check number 152 for $62. Use June 30th as the date. Okay. So what's different here compared to the previous problem that we had? Right? Look it over, see if there's anything different. Hopefully you pointed out that there's no actual deposit, okay? There's no deposit on this one. So it just kind of makes it easier, to be honest. That's it, okay? It just got easier. I just want to pull up my camera, make sure I've still got you all looking the same way. Okay. So if we look at this, we don't have a deposit. So what we're going to do is we're just going to carry down the subtotal to 231388, and then 231388. What's the amount that's actually on this check now? Well, this is supplies for $62. And now we just need to find that balance that's carried over. How do we do that? 2,313.88, still in our calculator from the last problem, minus 62 is 2,251.88. All right. So now we've done this bottom section, and we can move on to our 12 steps that we have here. So I'll go through this a little bit quicker. How much is the check? It's for $62. What's the date? It's June 30th. Who's this to? Southwest Supply. What's it for? It's for supplies. Okay, so that's all calculated there. Let's put in June 30th. And we're just transferring this information over, right? Who's it to? Oh, I hope I'm not going out of order there, right? Yeah. Who's it to? It's to Southwest Supply. What's the dollar amount? 62. So now you need to write it out. So let's do 60. There we go, 62, and no out of 100. So you can see there, I was going to put $62, but because it says dollars over here, we don't have to do that. So 62 and no, as in no change out of 100. What's this for again? This is our memo line. It's for supplies, and then we're going to put in student signature. So let's grade this final step. And there we go. Save and continue. And we'll go back. Just hit I'm done and grade. And there we go. A 12 out of 12. A lot of different steps here. A little bit longer lecture because there's a lot of terms as well. But if you have any questions, please let me know. These are great skills to know, just how to write a check as well. But a lot in 5-1. If you have any questions, let me know.